average, and this is again one of the powerful tools which Ramchandra started. And okay, therefore, let's see what it says. It says that suppose B is a subset of positive rationals, and its order is something another log, T power 5. And then you take F, there is a Dirichlet series, Ct, which is summation F of B, B power it. And now I am assuming that this Dirichlet series is positive. Okay, that's very important. And then I want to take the norm, L1 norm of that over an interval of length of 3h, for example, T to T plus 3h to T plus 6h. Okay. And what is this multiple averaging does? Multiple averaging does is now take this B, which is a subset of positive rationals, and break it into two parts, B1 and B2. The B1 is the part of those B's for which h times log B is less than T power epsilon. B2 is the part for which h times log B is bigger than T power epsilon. And in fact, you can even, if you want, you can take T power epsilon to be something like a log square T. It is not important, but let's take T power epsilon. Then this integral T plus 3h to T plus 6h gt dt is less than or equal to T plus 2h to T plus 7h f of B, B power it. Now B goes only in B1 plus O of T inverse. Okay, therefore let me explain what are all these things means. To start with, the part B2, which is consisting of those B's which are such that h log B is bigger than T power epsilon, they can be safely forgotten when you are trying to estimate it. Therefore, those B's for which h log B is bigger than T power epsilon can be safely forgotten, except for the risk of the length of integration, which was 3h earlier, has now become 5h. Therefore, the length of integration goes up a little, but in fact, for practical purposes, in analytical number theory, whether it is 3h or 5h, etc., are all the same, makes no difference. And except for that cost, which is immaterial, the part B2 can be actually forgotten. That's exactly what this multiple averaging does. And this is what we will now have many examples where this GT will be positive, and then we have to do the L1 norm of that. And most of the time we will use that and say essentially that the summation can be restricted to a small set, not a big set, which I'll give an example later. Okay, let us prove that. Fix an epsilon positive, and for a fixed epsilon, define R to be the integral part of 10 over epsilon, and define a capital U such that capital U times R equal to H. Therefore, capital U is essentially the same order as H because R is a constant. Okay, what is a multiple averaging means? Multiple averaging means I consider the integrals which are of the form 1 over U power R, 0 to U du1, 0 to U du2, etc., 0 to U dur, and again the same T to T plus 3H, T plus 6H. F, now the F becomes, for any F which is non-negative, F becomes F of T plus U1 plus U2 plus U1. And it was little boring to write, and therefore I will just write as 1 over U power R, and integral du. Integral du by definition means integral 0 to U du1, integral 0 to U du2, etc., integral 0 to U dur, and F of T plus U, which essentially means U plus U, where U means U stands for U1 plus U2 plus etc. UR. One observation which you have to make is that every little uj is less than capital U. Since every little uj is less than capital U, the little u, which is U1 plus U2 plus UR, is less than R times capital U, and R times capital U is less than or equal to H. And therefore, this U is actually the little u, it goes only up to H. What is the advantage? This first thing, suppose you have a single integral and you can estimate it in terms of the multiple integral, except again, as I was saying, at the cost of your range of integration, length of integration becoming from 3h to 4h. Okay, this cost will always be there and they will not be repeating. Therefore, the length of integration may go a little from 3h to 4h, but other than that, a single integral can be written as a multiple integral. Therefore, let me explain that, and then this is what I plan to use. Therefore, I have this single integral t to t plus 3h to t plus 6h f of t dt, which I write f of t is non-negative, and which I write as less than or equal to t plus 3h minus u to t plus 7h minus u f of t dt, which I can always do because the interval t plus 3h to t plus 6h is contained in t plus 3h minus u to t plus 7h minus u. Because I have already observed my little u is less than or equal to h. Since my little u is less than or equal to h, therefore this integral t plus 3h to t plus 6h is contained in t plus 3h minus u to t plus 7h minus u. And now I can make a change of variable, which will give you t plus 3h to t plus 7h f of t plus ut. And that is exactly the multiple integral which I have written earlier. I is equal to 1 over u power r 0 to u du1 du2 etc. Sorry. And now I apply 1 over u power r integral du to both sides. When I apply 1 over u power r integral du to both sides, the left hand side is independent of u. There is no u1, u2, u3, etc. nothing, and therefore that will not affect. And 1 over u power r integral du is precisely 1, because it is 1 over u power r 0 to u du1, 0 to u du2, 0 to u dur. And therefore 0 to u du1 will give you a u, 0 to u du2 will give you a u, 0 to u dur will give you a u, and therefore that gives you u power r, and therefore 1 over u power r integral du is of course equal to 1, and therefore it will not affect the left hand side. Left hand side will still continue to be t plus 3h to t plus 6h f of t dt, but on the other hand, the right hand side will become 1 over u power r integral du t plus 3h to t plus 7h f of t plus u. And that's exactly what this multiple average which I have written. 1 over u power r integral du f of t plus u. But now on the other hand, now you see that the original integral was of the length 3h. Now this new integral is of the length 4h. Therefore, except for this 3h going to 4h, I can always write one single integral as estimated by a multiple integral. Now, on the other hand, if I have a multiple integral, I can also do the single integral exactly by the same way. If I take a multiple integral, 1 over u power r, integral tu, integral t plus 3h to t plus 6h, f of t plus u, and this is equal to, I make a change of variable, 1 over u power r, integral du, integral t plus 3h minus u to t plus 6x minus u f of t dt, and which is less than or equal to 1 over u power r, integral du, and t plus 2h to t plus 6h, because again, as I was telling, u was less than or equal to h, and once u is less than or equal to h, t plus 3h minus u to t plus 6h minus u, that interval would be contained in the interval t plus 2h to t plus 6h, and f of t is non-negative, and therefore that is allowed. Therefore, except that if you start with the integral of length 4h, for example, a single integral, you can write as a multiple integral of length 5h. And on the other hand, if you have a multiple integral of length 4h, then you can write as a single integral of length 5h. Therefore, that's all what is the whole idea is. Therefore, whenever you have a single integral, you can write as a multiple integral, and when you have multiple integral, you can write as a single integral, provided the function is non-negative. Because the non-negativity is what I have used. Always I have written that, okay, I have an interval, therefore that is less than or equal to the integral over a bigger interval. That's the only idea which I have used, which needs the fact that the integrand is non-negative. If the integrand is not non-negative, I cannot say that the integral over a small interval is less than integral over a big interval. And that's good enough. And now we want to prove this theorem. We want to prove that t plus 3h to t plus 6h g of t dt is less than or equal to only the b1 part survives and the b2 part doesn't survive. Let's prove that. Now I write t plus 3h to t plus 6h. This is a single integral, which now I write as a multiple integral. And this multiple integral, therefore, it will look like 1 over u power r integral over du t plus 3h to t plus 7h g of t plus u dt. And this g of t plus u, I write g already I have defined, f of b, b power it, and therefore that's what I write. Therefore, that is summation over b, f of b, b power it plus u, and that is, the summation is over two sums, b1 and b2. And the b1 part, I keep it as it is, and the b2 part is what I am going to do something. And therefore, the b1 part is called S1, that's the integral, and b2 part S2. And as far as the b1 part is concerned, I don't know what else to do, and therefore I just take an absolute value. And once I take an absolute value, now this is a non-negative function. And once I have a non-negative function, the multiple integral can be written as a single integral. And therefore I have t plus 2h to t plus 7h summation over b in b1 f of b, b power it dt. Okay. Therefore I write the b as b1 plus b2. At the b1 part, I don't know what to do. I just put absolute value. And once I put an absolute value, that becomes non-negative. And therefore, I can make the multiple integral into a single integral. But the fact that I have made a multiple integral is what I am going to use as far as B2 is concerned. Now, let's do the B2 part. The B2 part, which is a S2, the B part is 1 over u power r, summation over b in B2. Now I interchange the summation, therefore it becomes t plus 3h to t plus 7h f of b, b power it. The t part, tt part I take it first, therefore 1 over u power r, b in B2, t plus h, 3h to t plus 7h f of b, b power it. And then the multiple integral is there, which is 0 to u, b power iu1, du1, b power 0 to u, b power iu2, du2, 0 to u, b power iu3, du3, up to 0 to u, b power iu or du. Now these integrals can be performed. And in fact, when you integrate 0 to u, b power iu du, which is going to be two terms in the numerator, and which the two terms in the numerator, which are sort of okay, what is b power iu du is b power iu, yeah, that is e power iu log b, and e power iu log b, when you integrate, you get e power iu log b divided by log b, and therefore that is a log b, and e power I into 0 log b minus e power capital U into log b, and both are of course absolute value 1, and therefore that will give you a 2, and there's a log b in the denominator. Oh, I should have probably put an absolute value sign, but that's okay, I forgot. Okay, therefore this integral 0 to u, b power iu du is less than or equal to 2 pi log b. And that such an integral comes all times. And therefore you will get a 2 divided by u log b raised to the power r. And then of course I don't know what else to do. Therefore I put an absolute value. Summation over b integral mod of b dt, etc. Okay. Now, what is it I have gained so far? I have gained the fact that I am in B in B2. Since B is in B2, by definition, my h log B is bigger than t power epsilon, and h and u are of the same order because u times r equal to h and r is a constant. Therefore, u log B is bigger than t power epsilon, and therefore what I have gained is essentially u log b, which is t power epsilon in the denominator, and this t power epsilon comes r times, and r is integral part of 10 over epsilon. Therefore, I have gained a 1 over t power 10 essentially in the denominator. Once I have gained a t power 10 essentially in the denominator, and then for the rest of that, I can take a trivial estimate, and mostly it will be negligible. That's all the proof. Okay. Therefore, let me again repeat the proof that once you have a non-negative function, you can write as a single integral in terms of multiple integrals, and multiple integrals in terms of single integrals. And therefore, you start with a single integral for a nominal function, and then write in terms of the multiple integrals. And then one part which you do not really know how to handle, you just estimate it trivially, the B1 part. As far as the B2 part is concerned, you can just into the fact that it's a multiple average, and therefore you can multiply, you can integrate so many times, And every time by integration, you gain a t power epsilon. And if you gain actually do it for 10 over epsilon times, you get a t power 10, and then that is already good enough for us. And remember, the summation over B1 part or summation over B2 part by themselves are not non-negative. Therefore, if you start originally with a non-negative function, and then of course, if you split it, and then it doesn't really matter. I mean, even if they are not non-negative, but on the other hand, once the multiple average integral, you want to make it a single integral, you put an absolute value and make it as a non-negative. Okay, this is basically the idea. And let me see. So far, is it okay? Clear?
Yes.
Because this is the idea which I am going to use again. I can even extend it. Suppose ht is a C infinity function, where, and you take the second derivative is rather very small, okay, which of course happens for us because our t was actually t log b, e power t log b. Therefore, if now under this h of t, of course, will depend upon b, otherwise there's no point, I can take it out. Okay, and then if you are interested in summation over b, f of b e power I h t, oh God. Sorry, same mistake. And I am assuming that this function is non-negative, and therefore I got absolute value. Therefore, the non-negativity is very important. And then again, that part B1 will come out, and the part B2 will not count. And the part which will not count is those b's for which the first derivative of h times capital H is bigger than t power epsilon. And that's exactly what we had earlier also, because you see, I have f of b e power I h t. There I had f of b power I t. B power, that is e power I t log b. Therefore, that time ht was t log b. And once ht is t log b, h double dash t is 0 and therefore small. And h dash t is t log b, and therefore h dash t is log b, and h log b is bigger than t power epsilon. Therefore, whatever I had, so the special case where ht is equal to t log b can be done for any ht, again provided the function is non-negative and provided the second derivative is rather small and ignorable. Okay, the proof, I had to only bother about the B2 part. Therefore, I have done the multiple averaging, and therefore I have a summation f of b b2 f of b e power I e to h of t plus u1 plus u2 plus ur, and h of t plus u is by definition h of t plus u times h prime dash t plus small. Since h of t plus u is h of t plus u times h dash t plus small, and therefore I can write h of t plus u1 plus u2 plus ur as h of t plus u1 h prime t plus u2 plus h prime t plus u3 h prime t, etc. And once I do that, by exactly the same argument, I am going to get e power iu into h prime t dt. And that integration will give you a h prime t in the denominator. Therefore, you will get a u times h prime t in the denominator. Since you get u times h prime t in the denominator, and since I am assuming that h times h prime t is bigger than t power epsilon, therefore every time I integrate, I get an extra t power epsilon. And if I do it 10 over epsilon times, I get a t power 10, and that is good enough. Okay. That's exactly what it is. And now I plan to give two applications of this theorem. The first application is a theorem of Hardy that given t rather large and put h is equal to t power 1/4 plus 2 epsilon, take h equal to t power 1/4 plus 2 epsilon, then there exists a little t lying between capital T and t plus h, such that zeta of half plus it equal to 0. In other words, on the critical line is sigma equal to half. On the critical line, sigma equal to half over every interval of length t power 1/4 plus 2 epsilon will contain a 0. Okay, how I am going to prove it? The first thing which I need is something called an approximate function equation. Yesterday we saw something called Hardy's first approximation. Hardy's first approximation said that if you take the function n summation 1 over n power s, n going up to capital T, then it approximates zeta function at any ordinate which is the same order as little t. That's what I studied. Therefore, that any given zeta function, you can zeta of half plus it little t can be approximated by summation n less than or equal to capital T 1 over n power s with a very small error. And that up to which point you go depends only upon the order of the little t and does not depend exactly on the little t. But now there is something called approximate functional equation, which is something which we need. And that says the following. Zeta, let it capital, oh, I have not written the m. Okay, mn equal to t by 2 pi. Remember, now it is mn equal to little t by 2 pi, not mn is of the order of t by 2 pi. I'm not saying mn is the order of t by 2 pi. I'm saying mn has to be exactly little t by 2 pi, integral part of that. Then zeta s equal to summation over n up to capital N 1 over n power s plus chi s to the summation 1 over n power 1 minus s. Now this n goes up to capital M, they have forgotten to write, plus an error which is order of n power minus sigma plus order of mod t power half minus sigma into m power sigma minus. Let me make a few comments on that. This is true only when capital M into capital N is equal to exactly equal to t by 2. Okay, and not of the order. That is number one. And what does it say? It says essentially, you know that zeta s equal to chi s into zeta 1 minus s. Now this says, since zeta s equal to chi s into zeta 1 minus s, you take the zeta s part, truncate it at capital L. You take the chi s into zeta 1 minus s part, truncate it to capital M, and that sum will approximate zeta function. In a region in which neither the zeta function nor chi s into zeta 1 minus s converge. Therefore, now you take a region, you have two formulations for zeta function. One is zeta s and another is chi s into zeta 1 minus s. You take a region where neither of them converges, but on the other hand, you take both of them and truncate at appropriate place and sum it up, and that would actually approximate zeta function. And what will be the error? And it is easy to remember what the error would be. The error would be exactly where you are truncating. Therefore, the error will be precisely the order of the lost term. N less than or equal to capital N 1 over n power s, the term corresponding to n is equal to capital N, that has an order n power minus sigma, that is one error term. And the second one, summation, the second one is chi s into summation 1 over n power 1 minus s, n goes up to m, and chi s is of the order t power half minus sigma, as you can see, because of course the chi s is in terms of gamma functions, and once you write chi s in terms of gamma functions and use Streling's approximation, you will see that chi s is of the order t power half minus sigma into the n 1 over n power 1 minus s. This 1 over n power 1 minus s, you are truncating at n is equal to m, and that gives you m power sigma minus 1. That's what exactly the approximate functional equation says. In particular, unlike the Hardy, therefore this is a disadvantage, as I have always been telling, is that this mn is not of the order t over 2 pi, and therefore it is exactly t over pi. But the advantage, the great advantage in this formulation is essentially that you can take your m and n to be of the order square root of t. Therefore, unlike the Hardy's first approximation, where you were actually approximating the sum up to t, here you are approximating as a sum of two terms, each of the order square root of t. And that is rather important. Okay. And now what do I do? Let Gt be chi of half plus it inverse into zeta of half plus it. If Gt is equal to chi of half plus it inverse into zeta of half plus it, and you can just check, because I have proved that zeta s equal to chi s into zeta 1 minus s, you can check that this Gt and its conjugate are the same, which means that Gt is real. Gt is R of t. Now, suppose Gt changes sign in t to t plus h, That's what I'm assuming. That GT changes sign in T to T plus H. What does it mean? Then the GT will have a 0 in T to T plus H. And GT as a 0 in T to T plus H is precisely the fact that zeta of how plus IT will vanish because chi of how plus IT inverse is of absolute value 1. Therefore, GT changes sign, then it's okay. We have already proved the theorem that there is a 0 between T and T plus H. Therefore, we can assume G of T is greater than or equal to 0 always. I mean, if it is negative, I put a negative sign. That means essentially we are back to multiple averaging. Okay. Therefore, because I have now function which is non-negative. And now, therefore, you write GT is equal to S1 plus S1 bar plus a small. And the small is, therefore, the S1 is actually e power I theta into summation 1 over n power s. N goes up to square root of t by 2 pi. Okay. Therefore, S1 equal to e power I theta t into summation n less than or equal to square root of t by 2 pi 1 over n power s. That comes precisely that. And the other one will be the conjugate of that, as we have seen. Therefore, this, after you multiply the chi of half plus IT inverse, and then you do that, then of course you get the first term and the second term will be the conjugate of that. And for this, now we will get a contradiction by proving the two facts. One fact is that integral T to T plus H modulus of GT is bigger than H, and integral T to T plus H G of T dt modulus is little o of H. If integral T to T plus H G of T dt is little o of H and integral of the modulus is greater than H, that means GT cannot be maintaining the same sign. If the GT were maintaining the same sign, then these two integrals should be equal. And but on the other hand, we are saying that one of the integrals is bigger than H and the other integral is little o of H. Okay, and now remember, one of the important things essentially is that we can assume that GT is non-negative. And therefore, you can use multiple averaging. And again, as I said, that if you take a GT which is non-negative multiple averaging, and if you write S1 and S1 plus, etc., and whether they have a multiple averaging or not, it doesn't really matter. They are non-negative or not, that doesn't really matter. Even if they are not non-negative, I can still do the multiple averaging. Therefore, now let's look at this. Yes. Therefore, I want to do integral. Oh, first, integral T to T plus H mod GT is bigger than H. And this is, but what is mod GT? Mod GT is for all practical purposes, when you take the modulus, is zeta of half plus IT. Therefore, what you need is the L1 norm of zeta of half plus IT. And that L1 norm is bigger than H is the theorem of Ramachandra. Okay. And of course, I should again point out, when I say it's a theorem of Ramachandra, what I meant was that a good generalization for any Dirichlet series for any length H is the theorem of Ramachandra, because in this particular case, for example, if you are taking zeta of half plus IT, and if your H is as small as t power 1/4 plus 3 epsilon, this is classically known. This was already due to Hardy. Okay, but Hardy was using the fact essentially that this zeta function is, the function is a zeta function, the length is of the order t power 1/4, etc., etc. Whereas Ramachandra's theorem is just to use triangular graph, the L1 norm that follows easily. And now what we want to prove is essentially the other one, T to T plus H, G of T dt is little o of H. Now therefore G of T we can write as S1 plus S1 bar, and we will do it only for S1, and S1 bar will be real. Therefore, T to T plus H, S1 of dt is T to T plus H, summation n not exceeding T by 2 pi 1 over n power of e power I H T dt. And now again I have written something which needs an explanation. I have always been telling that this n has to go to integral t over 2 pi, where not capital T, it's a little t over 2 pi. Because if you are, that's exactly what the approximate function says, that you can take your n to be going up to little t over 2 pi. But however, if you are in an interval of length, small length between t and t plus h, where h is something like a t power 1/4 plus epsilon. If you are in interval of strength t plus h, where h is t power 1/4 plus epsilon, then it is immaterial whether you take a little t or a capital T, because n less than or equal to little t over 2 pi and n less than or equal to capital T over 2 pi will not differ much. Okay, will differ maximum by one term, and that's all. Therefore, even though it is not generally possible to replace a little t by capital T, for example, if I were looking t to 2t of the integral, if we t to 2t of the integral, if I am looking, I could not have done that at all. The t to 2t of the integral, the little t has to be kept as a little t, and it cannot be taken as a capital T. And whereas if your interval is a small interval, your h is something like a t power 1/4 plus 2 epsilon, then it is possible to do. And actually, doing fourth power movement and so on and so forth, this gives you a little trouble, because if you are having n less than or equal to little t over 2 pi, and then the integral is also over dt, then interchanging the integration and summation becomes somewhat a complicated problem, because your range of summation depends upon little t, and you are integrating with the little t. But on the other hand, here we don't have such a problem, because we are in the interval t to t plus h. Since we are in the interval t to t plus h, of course, I can replace the little t by capital T. And this is exactly what we had. Namely, this is exactly summation n less than or equal to t over 2 pi 1 over n power of e power I h t dt. What is the ht? Ht is what comes from the chi of half plus it inverse zeta of half plus it, etc. When you do all those things, that ht happens to be t over 2 log t by 2 pi minus t by 2 minus t log n. This is exactly because essentially the e power I theta t which you have written, that theta t is precisely t over 2 log t over 2 pi minus t over 2 minus t log n. This summation, this integral is what somehow we have to prove to be little o of h. Yeah. How do we prove that this integral is little o of h? As it is, it's little difficult. But again, the multiple averaging helps. What is it? Multiple averaging helps that if you are this, you can, so since it's non-negative, you can do the multiple averaging. And if you do the multiple averaging, which means that only those range, if capital H into H prime T is bigger than T power epsilon, that range can be forgotten. Only capital H into H prime T is less than T power epsilon, that range has to be maintained. And now let's take n to be less than or equal to square root of t by 2 pi minus t power half plus epsilon into h inverse. That range, first of all, let me consider. The range n less than or equal to square root of t by 2 pi minus t power half plus epsilon into h inverse. And for that range, let us compute what is h times h prime t. H times h prime t, when you calculate, that exactly happens to be, that will be h there, into the h prime t happens to be logarithm of square root of t by 2 pi into 1 over n. Therefore, this is logarithm of square root of t by 2 pi into 1 over n. And the little t is the same as capital T. That's also a h there, which I have forgotten. Capital H into logarithm of square root of t by 2 by 1 over n. Now, what do you do with this logarithm of square root of t by 2 pi into 1 over n, which I think I have done here. Yeah. Logarithm of m over n is always bigger than or equal to mod m minus n divided by m plus n. This is what I will prove a little later. Logarithm of m by n is bigger than or equal to m minus n divided by m plus n. And that's exactly what I am going to use here. Logarithm of root t over 2 pi into 1 over n is bigger than or equal to root t over 2 pi minus n, or absolute value. But absolute value is not necessary because my n is small. Divided by square root of 2 pi into n, and then you multiply by h. But what I have assumed about n is less than square root of 2 pi minus t power half plus epsilon h inverse. That means the square root of the numerator square root of t by 2 pi minus n is bigger than or equal to t power half plus epsilon into h inverse. Therefore, that's the numerator is bigger than t power half plus epsilon into h inverse, and that's also h outside, and the denominator is of the order t power half. Okay, and therefore the t power half cancels, h and h inverse cancels, you get a t power epsilon. Which means this range n less than or equal to square root of t by 2 pi minus t power half plus epsilon into h inverse goes to the B2 part. The part B2, which capital H into H prime T is bigger than or equal to T power epsilon. And once it goes to the B2 part, it does not contribute anything. Therefore, that part goes in. And that's exactly what I wanted to do in the multiple averaging, that when you have a sum, a major chunk of the part can be thrown. Okay, and then you will be left with only the part which survives is only the interval which is the square root of t by 2 pi minus t power half plus epsilon by h to square root of t by 2 pi. This is the only part which survives. And therefore, what I have to do is essentially I have to now take this integral s1 dt equal to t to t plus h, the summation over n, 1 over n power of e power I h t, the summation over n. And the only part which I have to bother about is not all the n with 1 to square root of t by 2 pi, but I have to bother about only those n's which are in this particular interval. Okay, what do I do with the n's in this particular interval? And again, if you are like me, who was not too comfortable with your estimation of the exponential sums, the A process, B process, C process, etc. The only thing, obvious thing which you can do is to take a trivial estimate. Okay. And then suppose I do that, I take a trivial estimate, and then integral s1 dt is less than or equal to t minus h to t plus 2h. You see, again, I have made the length of integration a little bigger. Original length was h, and now the new length is 3h. This will always happen when you do the multiple averaging, but anyway, it doesn't really matter. Summation n in I, 1 over n power half dt. What all I have done is that I had a complicated function, summation n in I, 1 over n power half e power I h t dt, where h t was t by 2 pi log t by 2 pi minus t by 2 minus t log n. And when I want to do the estimation, of course, this e power, this ht has the first two terms in ht will not, of course, contribute anything. They can be taken outside the summation. And then you will get an e power minus it log n, which means you have summation 1 over n power half plus it. And with that 1 over n power half plus it, when you want to estimate it, of course, you will do it, you have to do some exponential sums, etc. And suppose you are not comfortable with that, you just simply take the trivial estimate. When you take a trivial estimate, then what do I get? I get a h, which comes from the length of integration. And then I get a t power half plus epsilon by h, which comes from the length of the summation. The length of integration is h. The length of summation is t power half plus epsilon into h. And then I get to 1 over t power 1/4. And this 1 over t power 1/4 comes from where? Because of the 1 over n power half. You remember, your n is essentially around square root of t by 2 pi. Since the n is around the square root of t by 2 pi, therefore 1 over n power half will give you a 1 over t power 1/4. When you do this 1 over t power 1/4, now you simplify it, the h cancels, then you get a t power 1/4 plus epsilon. And the t power 1/4 plus epsilon is order of a little o of h if h is bigger than t power 1/4 plus 2 epsilon. Okay, and therefore we have proved what we want, and this is Farade's theorem. Okay, therefore let me think. I am not very sure how many of you would have seen this, and therefore let me again simply repeat what I have said so far. I will first of all do the multiple averaging, which essentially means that if you have a non-negative function, which is very important, then, and when you want to do the L1 norm of that over a length, essentially only those b's for which h log b is less than t power epsilon counts. And the same idea can be extended, and therefore the only things which you will count is essentially h times h prime t, but provided, of course, the second derivative is very small. And that's exactly what we are doing. And now I want to prove the Farade's theorem is essentially to prove that these two integrals do differ very much. The one integral is mod integral mod gt. The other integral is just modulus of the integral gt. And you prove that one is the integral of modulus gt is bigger than h, and the integral of mod gt is little of h. And then that means the gt changes sign. Our whole aim is essentially to prove the gt changes sign. Since our aim is to prove gt changes sign, we can assume that gt is non-negative. And once you can assume gt is non-negative, that means you can do the multiple averaging. And if you can do the multiple averaging, that means essentially only a small range of n samples. And that gives a proof. Yeah. Now I said that log m by n is equal to n. Is bigger than or equal to m minus n by m plus n. Okay. How do I prove that statement? Let's say, for example, m is bigger than n. Because if n bigger, because the left hand side is okay. I mean, mod log m minus n is the same as mod log n by m. Okay, because the only negative sign comes and therefore that disappears. And the right hand side is also, the left hand side is interchangeable between m and n. The left hand side will not change when you interchange m and n. The right hand side will not change when you interchange m and n. And therefore I can as well assume m is bigger than n. And suppose 0 less than x less than 1. Therefore, if you have a 0 less than x less than 1, you can take the logarithm of 1 plus x by 1 minus x. And then you will take the log expansion for that. And the logarithm of expansion will give you 2x plus 2x cubed by 3 plus etc., which is bigger than or equal to 2x. And you put x is equal to m minus n by m plus n. When you put x equal to m minus n by n plus n, the 1 plus x actually becomes 2m, and 1 minus x actually becomes 2n. Therefore, 1 plus x by 1 minus x becomes m by n, and the x is, of course, m minus n. And that's all. This is something you will be using. I mean, there are many times when this particular inequality is very useful. Okay. And now we want to give one more application of that. And before that, give the application, I want to, this application depends upon the theorem of Montgomery and Vaughan. And let me state the theorem of Montgomery and Vaughan. It's very important. Integral t to t plus h, summation n not exceeding capital N, an by n power sigma plus it mod square dt is equal to summation over n not exceeding n, h plus o of little n mod an square by n power 2 sigma. Okay. This theorem is again one of the very important theorems called Hilbert's inequality. And I should probably talk about the salient features of this theorem. This O of little n, which I am having, original version gives the O of capital N log n. And then this log n was removed, and therefore you got a capital O of capital N. And then Montgomery and Vaughan were able to make this O of capital N into O of little n. Now you may be wondering, what's the great point? Because your little n goes up to capital N. If your little n goes up to capital N, then should it make a lot of difference between whether you have it as O of capital N or whether you have O of little n? Will it make a lot of difference? The answer is yes. And I will give one example where it makes really a difference whether you have a little n or a capital. This give, for example, this corollary, that is integral t to 2t zeta mod of plus it whole square dt is asymptotic to t log t. How do we prove that? The way we prove that is you take zeta of half plus it, for example, and use Hardy's approximation, for example. Once you use Hardy's approximation says that this is less than or equal to n less than or equal to capital T 1 over n power half plus it. And then, therefore, the zeta function can be replaced by n less than or equal to t 1 over n power half plus it, which essentially means that I can now use this theorem with n is equal to capital T and an equal to 1 and sigma equal to half. And when you put an equal to 1 and sigma equal to half and n equal to t, the main term gives you a t because h is also t now. T into mod an square is 1 divided by n power 2 sigma is n. Therefore, you will give the main term will be h times h into 1 divided by n. And that summation n goes up to t, that gives you log t. Now look at this error term. Suppose I had a capital N there, then I would have got a capital N, which is t into 1 divided by n. Okay. Therefore, t into 1 divided by n, that will also give me a t log t. The O term also will be of the order t log t. Since the O term will be of the order t log t, I can't write as that. Therefore, what I will end up with is it is t log t plus O of t log t. And that does not mean that the function is asymptotic to t log t. T log t plus O of t log t will not mean that it is asymptotic to t log t. But on the other hand, what happens if you have a little n there? If you have a little n there, then the error term is O of little n into mod an square, which is 1, by n power 2 sigma, which is n, and this little n cancels. Therefore, what you have is summation n not exceeding t1, which is O of t. Therefore, the Hardy's first approximation itself would give the error term to be O of t. Of course, I mean, but on the other hand, this thinks that it is a set of r plus t whole square dt is around t log t was known already to Hardy, and therefore really do not need the theorem of Montgomery and Vaughan to prove this result. But however, the theorem of Montgomery and Vaughan makes it much more easier to prove, because otherwise you have to use approximate functional equation, and approximate functional equation, once you are interested in t to 2t, has its own problem of the sum of the range depending upon the linearity. But anyway, now much more is known. We know that it is t log t plus constant times t plus O of t power 1/3 plus epsilon constant. Good. Now I want to talk about the second application. This is what I have been talking about. That f of s equal to summation an by n power s with an equal to O of n power epsilon. Probably I may not even need it, but anyway, we will assume that an equal to O of n power epsilon, and assume that it is analytically continuable in sigma bigger than -1. It is analytically continuable in sigma bigger than -1. Then integral t plus h to t plus 2h f of it whole square dt is bigger than h into summation mod an square, where n goes up to capital M, and capital M is h power 1 minus epsilon. This is the theorem which I was pointing out yesterday, that if you have a function, remember f of s, I am assuming an equal to O of n power epsilon. Since f of s is equal to an summation an by n power epsilon, the only thing which I know is that this f of s is convergent, even probably absolutely convergent, to the right of 1. But on the other hand, I am taking the Euler norm at the point 0. Therefore, the f has, and the only other assumption they are making is f is analytically continuable. I don't even know what is the, how I am going to continue it. What is the analytic continuation? Therefore, and the ANs may not play any role at all in the analytic continuation. Therefore, when you are looking at the value at 0, f of it, then the ANs play no role at all. And in spite of that, the fact that the ANs are the coefficient to the right of 1 already seems to play some role in taking the L2 norm on the 0 line. Okay, and Ramchandra made a very heavy use of that. For example, just before this I was talking about. Therefore, what you can do, for example, is you can take f of s equal to essentially the square root of zeta s, and the square root of zeta s, you write as summation an by n power s, again to the right of 1, and compute the ans. And then when you want to do these things, and then you write the h into summation. Therefore, in particular, t to 2t will be bigger than or equal to t into summation mod an square, n goes up to t power 1 minus epsilon, and you know the idea about en, and you can sum it up, and that gives you the log t power 1. That's how you proved it. And he also proved that you take f of s to be the zeta function to rise to a very high power, zeta s power k, and then your ANs or dkn, as I was telling, that when you take zeta s over k, that is summation dkn by n power s, and then this lower bound is h into dkn whole square, n going up to m, and dkn whole square, n going up to m, you can actually, that will be the bound for mod zeta of r plus it power 2k, for example. And then that gives you the maximum of zeta of r plus it power 2k as a lower bound, and then take the kth root. And that's how Ramachandra first proved that the zeta function is bigger than exponential constant times the square root of log t by log t. That is again one of the results which are proved new by Ramachandra. I mean, Ramachandra has used this theorem in many contexts, essentially to get a lower bound for the various Dirichlet series. Okay, how do we prove that? First of all, I will give you an idea of the proof. Okay, and I think I have already talked really somewhat heavy matters, and probably I will not go all the way for 1.5 hours because I think it needs some time to understand it. Therefore, first of all, let me start with the idea of the proof. The idea of the proof is you write n equal to, you write n, f of s, which is summation an by n power s. You break it to capital M, n less than or equal to m, an by n power s, with an by n power s, n bigger than or equal to m. And now you see, I am having a mod square, which is a non-negative function. Once I have a mod square, which is a non-negative function, I can do the multiple average, which is what I'm going to do. Now, what I want to do is essentially when you take the mod square, etc., the cross product does not contribute much. The cross product does not kill you because the meta will give you from this n less than or equal to m, an by n power s, as well as n bigger than or equal to m, an by n power s mod square. And then, of course, the cross product. You have to say that this cross product is killed. Okay? And suppose the functions were really convergent at 0, for example, then morally the cross product will cancel. Morally the cross product will, morally the cross product will be nothing. That is essentially because morally every term will be in B2. Why is it every term is in B2? I take h times log B, which is h times log m over n, and the little m is bigger than or equal to capital M plus 1, and little n is less than or equal to m. Since little m is bigger than or equal to capital M plus 1, and little n is less than or equal to m, therefore h log m by n is bigger than h to modulus of m minus n by m plus n, which we have seen many times, and m minus n is at least 1, and m plus n is of order m, and m is taken to be h power 1 minus epsilon, and therefore h log b is bigger than h power epsilon. And since h log b is bigger than h power epsilon, this morally should go to B2. And once it morally goes to B2, that will have no contribution at all by multiple averaging. And then we are already through. Okay. And this is basically the idea. And therefore, let me make it a little more rigorous. Therefore, I write f of s equal to summation an by n power s with n not exceeding capital N, and plus summation an by n power s, n bigger than or equal to m plus n. And the first part will be called as, and the second part will be called bs. Now remember, I am already assuming my f of s is analytically continuable in sigma bigger than -1. And therefore, this f of s is already valid in sigma bigger than -1. And my as is also valid in sigma bigger than -1 because it's a Dirichlet polynomial. And any Dirichlet polynomial is valid anywhere. And bs, therefore, is also valid in sigma bigger than -1. Not by this formula summation an by n power s, n bigger than or equal to m plus n, because this particular formula may not even converge. But as you define bs to be fs minus as. Since you define bs to be fs minus as, therefore the bs also exists to the right of -1. Because fs exists, as exists, and therefore bs also exists to the right of -1. That's very important. And now write f of it whole square equal to modulus of a. Okay, since I have written f of s equal to as plus bs, therefore f of it is equal to A of IT plus B of IT. Therefore, f of IT whole square equal to A of IT whole square plus B of IT whole square plus 2 times the real part of A bar IT, B of IT. And that essentially means, if you now look at T plus 3H, T plus 6H as f of IT whole square, then that single integral, I can lower bound or multiple. Oh, sorry, I said the single integrals can be upper bounded by multiple integrals, and the same argument, of course, gives the single integral can be lower bound also by a multiple integral by just taking the range of integration to be little smaller. You see, the upper bound, of course, you took the range of integration little bigger, but here you take a range of integration little smaller, and once you assume that the function is non-negative, there is really no problem. Therefore, that's a multiple integral. Therefore, since f of it mod square is a non-negative function, I can make it as a multiple integral, and that which I can write as mod of A of IT whole square and mod B of IT whole square. But mod B of IT whole square, I don't have any idea at all. And anyway, it is non-negative, and therefore I can forget it because I am only interested in the lower bound. Since I am interested in the lower bound and the modulus of B of IT is non-negative, I can forget it. And therefore, what I will have is T to into a multiple integral T plus 3H T plus 6H mod A of IT whole square minus 2 times the multiple integral T plus 3H T plus 6H A of IT bar B of IT dt. Therefore, this is this cross term. This cross term is what I have to somehow make it disappear. And I want to use the multiple average to make the cross term disappear. Now, how do I do that? First of all, now there is a standard method in analytic number theory. So when you look at that whenever you have an integral of some function and you don't have an idea about that function, on that line, on the sigma equal to 0 line, you are on the line sigma equal to 0. On that line, you don't have an idea. But on the other hand, this the B function has, of course, you know what it means when sigma is bigger than 1, because there it is given by this formula, summation an by n power s, n bigger than or equal to a plus 1. Therefore, let's say the 3 line. On the 3 line, of course, it makes a BS makes sense. And then what you do is simply to move the line of integration. Move the line of integration from sigma equal to 0 to sigma equal to 3. And then, of course, you have an idea about it. Yes. And then you can use the whatever I said earlier. Morally, this cross product is supposed to be 0, and you can actually prove that the cross product is equal to 0. And that's exactly what we want to do, and which we will do it tomorrow. But meantime, let me make just some couple of final remarks. Number one, all this moving the line of integration, blah, blah, you can do only if you have a function which is analytic. Okay, the B function is not a problem. The B function is analytic. But this A function applies with the complex conjugate. And once the A function applies with a complex conjugate, it is not really possible to move. Therefore, you cannot take A of S bar and then say that I am now moving the line of integration to 3, because, of course, the A of S bar is not an analytic function at all. Therefore, first problem which we have to solve is essentially somehow what to do with this A of IT bar. Since A of IT bar is not analytic, and since B of IT, I have no clue at all on sigma equal to 0. Therefore, the only way I can do something with this B of IT is when you move the line of integration to sigma equal to 3. Then, of course, I will have an idea of what is B of S on the line sigma equal to 3. But then I have to move, which means, but on the other hand, this A is not an analytic function at all, and therefore I don't even know what to do. Therefore, now let's solve the problems one by one. Therefore, let's write this as S1 minus S2. Now let's look at this S1. S1 is rather easy. S1 is rather easy because what you can do is essentially you have a modulus of A of IT whole square, and modulus of A of IT whole square is a non-negative function. And once it has a non-negative function, the multiple average, you can take a single average. Just what I will always do. You take a non-negative function, you have a single average, then you can make it a multiple average, and if you have a multiple average, then you make it a single average. Therefore, you make it a single average A of 80 whole square. And now I can use the theorem of Montgomery and Vaughan. That's exactly the reason why I said that. Because A of IT, remember, is a Dirichlet polynomial. It's not, okay, which is a finite summation an by n power s and not exceeding m. And you have some finite thing like summation an by n power s and not exceeding m. Its L2 norm is actually given by this h into summation n not exceeding m mod an square, and the error term will disappear because the error term will be a little o of n, and the n is goes up to capital M, and the capital M is h power 1 minus epsilon, and therefore that problem, that thing does not compute. Now we do something interesting. What do we do? I look at this function d of s, which is summation an bar n power s. Okay, remember all the Dirichlet series which you would have seen so far, or looks like a summation an by n power s. But here I am now looking at a Dirichlet series which looks like a summation an bar times n power s. Okay, and this function is analytic, of course, clearly, because some coefficients an bar and then this n power s. Now this function you restrict to it. When you restrict to it, then you get summation n not exceeding x, an bar, n power it. But summation n not exceeding x, an bar, n power it is n power it is precisely the conjugate of summation an by n power it, which means that this d of it is precisely a of it bar. In other words, therefore, this a bar, even though the conjugation applies, but in spite of the fact that the conjugation applies, we have just made it still a restriction of an analytic function. We have made it as a restriction of an analytic function, and consequently, our problem is partly solved. Therefore, now I can take, instead of it bar, I can take this function ds into bs. And if we take ds into bs, then at it, then the d of it is a of it bar, and at it, b of s is b of it, and ds into bs is a nice analytic function, and I can move the line of integration. But that gives you another problem. What's another problem? Is that in the ds, it is n power, not n power minus s, it is n power s, which essentially means, see, once you have, I have been always seeing that when you look like something like an an over n power s, and then you move to the right, then the order goes down. Therefore, whenever you move to the right, the order goes down, and the move to the left, the order goes up, which is something which you have already seen. For example, in the case of mu sigma equal to, under Lindelof hypothesis, for example, mu sigma equal to 0 when sigma is bigger than half, and mu sigma is equal to half minus sigma when sigma is less than half. If it is a Lindelof hypothesis is true, which means that essentially mu sigma is very small to the right of half, and half minus sigma to the left of half, and therefore the function actually is of a much higher order to the left and a lower order to the right. But on the other hand, the ds is not something like that. ds will be higher order to the right and lower order to the left, because the n power s appears. S appears in the numerator. S appears, n power, it's not n power minus s. That essentially means that the error in moving the line of integration from sigma equal to 0 to sigma equal to 3 has to be rather controlled carefully. Therefore, that's also very important. Somehow, by putting an n power s down up, we have solved one problem, namely the AIT bar is still a restriction of an analytic function. But on the other hand, this analytic function grows when you move towards the right. And therefore, normally when you move the line of integration from sigma equal to 0 to sigma equal to 3, the error has to be controlled. Okay. Therefore, now let's define g of s equal to the integral of ds into bs, okay, which is 1 over u power r integral 0 to this multiple average 0 to du1, 0 to dur to d of s plus iu into b of s plus iu. Okay, this this function is precisely what we have at IT. When you take g of IT, then that is integral of d of IT, m of IT, and d of multiple average of d of IT, m of IT, b of IT, d of IT, b of IT is precisely what you have. Of course, I have written as a of IT bar b of IT, but that is the same as d of IT, m of IT, and there's a multiple averaging, and then there's an integral over t. The integral over t is t to c. And therefore, the crosstalk is precisely t plus 3h to t plus 7h into g of it dt. And this gs is an analytic function. Since this gs is an analytic function, I can now somehow move it to the line 3, and then you can do it, provided, of course, I can prove that the error term is small. Therefore, now we prove g is small, and then move the line of integration to sigma equal to p3 and do the multiple average. And I will now close this lecture by proving this particular lemma, that this d of s, b of s, and the L2 norm at IT is rather small. Okay, d is no problem at all, but remember b is defined just as b is defined as f minus a. That's the only information which we have. That the bs I cannot write as sigma an by n power s. Okay, I have to write bs as fs minus as. And then we have to prove that. Okay, therefore that's exactly what I want to prove. I want to prove that summation t to t plus h d of it b of it whole square is O of h into summation mod a n square. Let's do that. LHS is less than integral d square plus integral b square, because I am just using the fact d of it b of it whole square is less than or equal to integral of d of it whole square plus b of it whole square. B, I have the only information, as I was telling, B as the only information is f minus a, and that's the only information which I can use. Therefore, that is d of square plus mod f square plus mod a square dt. Now, d has no problem, because d is essentially again a Dirichlet polynomial. Since d is a Dirichlet polynomial, I can use Montgomery's theorem. Montgomery-Wann's theorem. Since d of it, I can now explicitly, and for any Dirichlet polynomial, I can use Montgomery theorem. Therefore, that will give you summation h plus O of n into mod a n square, and that's exactly what I want. And this O of n will actually disappear, because n goes up to capital M, and the capital M has been assumed to be h power 1 minus epsilon. Capital M is assumed to be h power 1 minus epsilon, and therefore that will disappear. And then I want to bother about the cardinality of a it whole square. Cardinality of a it whole square also I have no problem, because again that is a Dirichlet polynomial. Since there's a Dirichlet polynomial, mod a of it whole square is equal to summation n not exceeding m h plus O of n into mod a n square, again by Montgomery. No, the only problem is mod f square. But you see, what is it I want to prove? I want to prove, well, let's go back to the theorem. The theorem which I want to prove is mod fit whole square is bigger than h into mod a n square. And therefore, I can actually assume the negation of it. Okay. Since I can assume the negation of it, therefore t plus h into t plus 2h into mod fit whole square, I can assume to be less than h into mod a n square. Because otherwise, I have really nothing to do. And therefore, modulus of t to t plus h modulus of f of it whole square is O of h into summation mod a n square by assumption. And therefore, this lemma is proved. And this lemma is what I want to really use tomorrow to prove the following. What is it we will prove? We will prove, let's recall what I have to prove. I have defined the GS, and the cross term is t to t plus 3h to t plus 7h, g of it dt. I have to prove that g is rather small, and therefore I can move it to the line of integration to the line 3. And at the line 3, of course, the ds is also valid, bs is valid. I can actually do the multiple averaging, and we have already seen morally this integral doesn't, morally this integral cannot exist, and consequently the cross terms don't contribute anything, and that proves the original theorem. I think I will stop there because I think it's a slightly heavy material, and I am not even sure how many of you have seen this material. Probably most of you would be seeing this material for the first time, and therefore I think I'll stop here. Thanks.
Thank you, sir, for such a nice lecture. So, do you have any questions?
Hello, sir. I have a question actually.
Yeah,
So
sure.
this multiple averaging technique can produce the quantitative version of the zero counting in short interval for zeta function.
Yes. No. Can you repeat it again? What's it?
I mean, this multiple averaging technique can able to produce the quantitative version of the zero counting of zeta function along this half line in short interval.
Density results?
Sorry?
Density, you want density results for the zeta function?
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Density result, I am not very sure.
Okay.
Okay.
This, because I mean,
yeah.
As A. Karatsuba consider similar multiple averaging technique.
Yeah.
And he able to produce kind of say weak results. Say your short interval t to t plus h, where h is t to the power roughly 1/3. So in this interval, he kind of produce a weak result for a linear combination of Dick's series, but not exactly the method this multiple averaging technique. He consider kind of some parameterized by the powers of this multiple integral. So I just confuse.
You want to know what is the number of zeros of the between the ordinates, the capital T and the T plus H. What is that? Yes. Something which you can prove? Is that what you want to know?
Yes. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
That you don't need multiple averaging. What all you need is essentially an L2 estimates and upper bound. You see, an upper bound L2 estimates on the half line and yeah, essentially on the half line and one line. And in fact, I have considered similar problems in my thesis, which appeared, I think, in the proceedings of the London Math Society, where I have taken again t equal to 1/3, and in fact I have taken a little smaller, I think, 27 by 82 or something like that, and proved that proved is a wrong word because I will say proved that that you can have a density result for such a short intervals, because that idea is rather classical. You only need an L2 norm of the theta function or whatever function in such a short interval. And I first proved a better asymptotic for the L2 norm of t to 2t mod theta power plus it whole square. And I got an error term which is actually better than t power 1/3. And this was, of course, an improvement of a result of Titmarsh, who had t power 5/12. And consequently, I had an L2 norm from t to t plus t power 1/3, okay, for on the half line. And once you have a L2 norm from t to t plus t power 1/3 on the L2 norm on the half line, then it's a classical result, actually, how to get the error term. And in fact, in my paper, as I stated the result, I did not even prove it. I just said that it follows essentially by the classical methods. There's nothing. I mean, that doesn't really need a proof, because it's well known that if you have an L2 norm over a short interval for the zeta function, you can actually get a zero density estimates also. That follows essentially with the convexity.
So, I mean, this 82 by 27 is a barrier, or one can expect better?
One can actually expect much better. One can actually expect much better because, let me see what is, yeah. I mean, Okay. Okay, what I did was, okay, the how do I put that? The when you do the multiple averaging, etc., only a certain small part remains. No, in my notation, the B2 part
Right.
can be forgotten and the B1 part. And this B1 part, you have to estimate using exponential sums, using A process, B process, etc. And at least I was doing it somewhere in 1976. At that time, of course, the estimation for the exponential sums on the offline was not very well, and I could prove 27 by 82. But on the other hand, now we know how to estimate the zeta function on the offline much better, because various things, including the result 0.155, and I think those methods would apply. And technically speaking, I would think that you can go up to a length which is the best known for the bound for the zeta function on the half line. And sorry, twice of that. Okay, therefore I got
Twice.
1/3. At the time it was 1/6 was known, and therefore I got 1/3. Now it is 0.155 is known, and therefore theoretically, if you work out, then you should probably be able to go up to a length of 0.31. I have not tried it, but I do not think there will be any unexpected difficulties there.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, sir. Is there any more questions? So I have some little stupid questions, sir. Can you share the screen on the last page?
See this. Oh, share the screen.
Yes, sir, on the last page.
Okay, I'll do that. A minute. Last page. Yes. Yes.
Sir, here on this line, let's just we are assuming that a square b square is less than equal to a square plus b square. So do you be making some restriction?
Oh, sorry, you are right. I think I don't have a square there. D of it, B of it is what I'm looking at. Integral t to t plus h, d of it, B of it, mod dt is less than mod d square plus mod b square. So that's exactly what the square also should not be there. Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah, that's such kind of mistakes is what I have to sort of.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay.